What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Always Compete Seahawks podcast. My name is Sam. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I figured that I would go through and talk about some of the offensive coordinator candidates that the Seahawks have interviewed, some candidates that I want them to interview, talk about the pros and cons, give them a little bit of a backstory, and put a face to the name because I'm sure that you guys have heard a lot of interview buzz coming out. I'm sure you guys have heard all about these names, and I'm going to break down how I would feel about them, what they bring to the table, their backstory, and ultimately just break down every single candidate that they've interviewed so far, break down maybe some that they can't interview, and break down some that I want them to interview. So let's get started here. We will go through. And the first name is Clint Kubiak, former Saints OC. I believe this was reported by Jeremy Fowler. The Seahawks are going to talk to Kubiak. He was the Saints offensive coordinator this year. Obviously, he's now a former because they will be getting a new head coach. Now, who's to say that maybe a new head coach wouldn't want to talk to Kubiak and say, hey, we liked what you did here. Maybe you stay around. But I would be surprised, especially considering that it looks like it's going to be Aaron Glenn. They have a very deep Detroit offensive staff to pick from there. And I think that they will probably end up taking someone from that staff. As for Kubiak, what he brings, you guys might remember at the start of the year when the Saints started red hot and they blew out the Panthers and Cowboys. Kubiak was already getting buzz as a head coach, and then obviously things kind of went off the rails for the Saints at times this year. There were so many injuries. Spencer Rattler was starting games at quarterback. I believe Jake Haener started games at quarterback for them. They really had a lot of things go wrong. Kubiak, however, I mean, still maintained what was ultimately a decent offense. For pros, I listed he has experience calling plays. He has a full year of experience play calling. That's a big difference from going from 0 years to a full season of calling games. I think that's a big help. Comes from a great background. This guy is from the Shanahan McVay kind of build there. He coached in San Francisco. I believe he was the offensive coordinator, and then he ended up getting hired by the Saints as OC. He was a rookie OC this year. Young and innovative. That's kind of something that comes with that Shanahan background. A lot of guys that come from that are very young, and they like to change things up. They like to be dynamic on offense. They like to do trick plays. They like to do things that mess the defense up. And I think that Mike Macdonald is all about messing offenses up. I think this guy has a similar idea. The one con that I really listed here is mediocre results as a play caller. I mean, and that is with a caveat that he was working with a really poor situation. The Saints were already not a very good team, and then everybody got hurt. So that really sucks. And, I don't think anyone could really make it work in that situation. That being said, he made it decent, which is, I mean, as much as you can probably ask for him in this situation. The Saints were a middling offense throughout most of the season. And I think Kubiak overall would be a good hire. I'm happy that they're talking to him. He does have that experience. He comes from that background. I think this is a pretty good choice for someone that they're talking to. And obviously, he's just one of many. But for the three that we know for a fact they will talk to, I think this is a pretty good choice. For the second one, Thomas Brown, former Bears offensive coordinator and interim head coach. This guy shot up this year. He was, I believe, the Bears pass game coordinator. I think at one point he was a Rams running back coach, and then he went to Carolina with Frank Reich. Frank Reich gets fired after one season. He joins the Bears this year as a first year pass game coordinator, and he goes from, I believe, in week 10 he was the pass game coordinator. In week 11, he was the offensive coordinator after Shane Waldron, Seahawk legend Shane Waldron, gets fired there, and he ends up stepping into that pass game coordinator role. And then I believe it's the week or the week after, Eberflus has that fiasco on Thanksgiving Day. Eberflus gets fired. He gets promoted to head coach. So, he had a crazy season. He started calling plays after week 11. So we really only have like 6 or 7 weeks of like real play calling from him. Play calling experience, but minimal. Remember, I mean, he did call plays at points. So, I mean, like that is a pro. To call plays at all is a pro, but that he has a very little experience. Kubiak doubles his experience in play calling. He obviously had a chance to learn a lot more things than Brown did. And the Seahawks obviously played the Bears with him at head coach and when he was calling plays, and they scored 3 points. So, not a great look if you were to go out and hire him. Good reputation. He's seen as an up and comer. Brown has a really good reputation around the league. When he got promoted to OC, there was already buzz about, hey, this guy could be a head coach. I think it was Rappaport going out and saying, like, hey, a lot of teams like this guy. They think he's a good young candidate, a guy that can really get better, and a guy that can, kind of learn on the fly and maybe get head coaching interviews this offseason. Hasn't really worked out that way for him. He just his time there was not good. He did end on a high note, beating the Packers, who were not laying down. That was not like a backup Packers team. He went into Green Bay and beat the Packers, ending that Bears streak for them. That's fine, and that's good. Ultimately, his results in play calling were poor, and like you can't argue anything against it. You look at the numbers. That Bears offense after Week 11 was middling to bad. There's and there are a lot of caveats there. The offensive line was really bad. Obviously, we have plenty of experience in that, so maybe you don't want someone who has already shown that they can't call plays with a poor offensive line. And I'm still gonna say he's inexperienced. Calling 6 games and going from a pass game coordinator to an interim head coach in like 2 weeks. I don't know. I'm not sold on his experience. I think that if he were to come in and run an offense here again, maybe he would know a couple things. Maybe he would be able to balance some things out better. Ultimately, I'm not just going to sell it. I think compared to Kubiak, this hire would be a lot more reckless and would be one that I'm not, frankly, as interested in. This next one here, Hank Fraley, the current Lions offensive line coach. This was the first name that came out. I believe Tom Pelissero reported it. He also reported the Thomas Brown one. And I feel like a lot of Seahawks fans fell in love with this guy immediately. Same with me. Fraley was an offensive line in the NFL for about an offensive lineman in the NFL for about 11 years. That's the position I played. He was a guard position that I played. He was a good offensive lineman at that. He ends up getting into coaching, and I believe he's hired as the Lions offensive line coach in 2019. That Lions offensive line is always really good. It's been really good pretty much the entire time he's been there. He's developed a lot of really good players like Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell and Jonah Jackson, who just got a big contract with the Rams last offseason. And they've had a offensive line moving through there that's been very productive and very steady. A lot of it due to Hank Fraley. And, one of the pros could be that, hey, Kevin Zeitler, the guard, is a free agent this offseason. Dan Skipper, the tackle, is a free agent this offseason. You wonder if Fraley goes there. He might be able to be like, hey, guys, you guys can start here for me. You're my guys. Come on, come back and let's get this done. I think a lot of people fell in love with his look. I mean, just look at that guy. Imagine Mike McDonald going up to this dude on 3rd and 1 and being like, hey, I want to pass here. This dude is gonna kick somebody's ass. Hell, I think I remember listening to Real Hawk Talk. Shout out to them, amazing podcast. I recommend it for a lot of Seahawks fans. Brian and the gang. Brian does shows every day, so credit to him for that. I think someone said, like, is it possible that we could get an offensive coordinator that could also play offensive line? And it was kind of laughed off. And then this came out, and it's like, this dude could step in right now and play offensive line. Something to take in note. I mean, obviously that's a joke, but still, I mean, I don't doubt for a second that he would be like, put me in, let me go. I mean, this guy's big, he's mean. His pros, great results in coaching O-line and the run game. This is a guy who has apparently a lot of input on the run game in Detroit. And there's already some buzz. I believe Albert Breer reported that there's already buzz that he is like seeking out someone who could be a pass game coordinator, which would be kind of interesting. It would kind of be like a 2 offensive coordinator thing where he ultimately calls the plays, but he would pretty much have full input on the run game, and then he would call plays assisted with a pass game coordinator. Maybe it's someone from Detroit, maybe it's someone who just coached with him throughout his career. That would be interesting to see. I think he's a really interesting pick. Would be a run-focused OC like McDonald is looking for. Offensive linemen, they love running the football. They love mauling guys. They love just getting down in the trenches and fighting for every goddamn yard. And I love that about this guy. I think also when you take in Detroit, their runs are extremely creative. They're not bland runs that all go nowhere. These are runs that really are effective, have a ton of success, and I think it would be interesting to see how Fraley kind of mixes that in Seattle. Where I mean, come on, if you're talking about Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet getting creative runs going, I think that would be a huge benefit for this team. The cons, he has no experience calling plays. He has zero experience. That's the one big negative. You wonder how he would handle that. Obviously, there would be kind of an adjustment period, which is a bit of a concern. But at the same time, I mean, a lot of people, at least people that I've seen, take it so that if they've never called plays, it's like a non-starter. I don't see it that way. Every coach has to start somewhere. Every great offensive coordinator has to start somewhere. Every single great offensive coordinator in the league or every single great offensive head coach at one point was not calling plays and they had to take the reins. I think that Fraley would be a pretty safe pick because he comes from that background. I don't think he would be the type of guy to like try to revolutionize an offense. I don't think he would try to do anything crazy. I think he would play hard nosed football. He would coach the O line well. And I think he would bring in a lot of guys from Detroit who ultimately would probably benefit the Seattle team a lot. So I think this would be a really great hire. I'm kind of bouncing in between whether Kubiak or him would be better. I think he is better than Thomas Brown, though. I like him a lot. I think he's an interesting name to keep an eye on, especially if the Lions make a deeper playoff run and the Seahawks haven't hired an OC yet. That might be a sign that they are holding out for this guy and want to bring him in. We'll see how that goes. Let's talk about one name that a lot of people rumored about the Seahawks maybe getting or at least interviewing, but ended up getting blocked. It's Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka was blocked by the Giants. He's the current Giants offensive coordinator. He interviewed twice for the Seattle coach last year, the Seattle head coaching job last year. I think people remember that. I think a lot of people were panicking about it. Ultimately, I think that was more of a hire where they were trying to see about, like, oh, could this guy be an offensive coordinator for us? That happens a lot where like you're seeing some teams interviewing Josh McCown, who is the current Vikings quarterbacks coach, to be offensive coordinator. I mean, to be head coach, and like people are like, what are they doing? What are they doing? I think they're just bringing them in, getting them in the building, seeing what they're like, and then saying, all right, this guy could be a good offensive coordinator one day. I mean, it very rarely happens where a quarterbacks coach is hired as a head coach. I think the one time that happened was with Zach Taylor. I want to say I think Zach Taylor was the assistant head coach and quarterbacks coach for the Rams and went to coach Cincy when that move panned out pretty well for them. He interviewed for the Seattle head coaching job last year. Last year, he was also blocked as the OC. Seahawks wanted to bring him in for an interview. It seemed like Kafka wanted to interview, and he was denied. The Giants seem to really like him, even though he doesn't really call plays. Daboll calls most of the plays there, and that kind of brings me to experience under offensive gurus. He's coached under Andy Reid. I believe he was the Chiefs quarterbacks coach. Use that to get the Giants OC job under Daboll. So he's coached under Andy Reid, coached under Brian Daboll, two really well-regarded offensive play callers. But he has little play calling experience, and the results with the New York Giants are poor. That offense has molasses. It's like basically molasses, and without Saquon this year, they had nothing except for like Malik Neighbors. So this is ultimately a name you're probably not going to see. I believe Mike Garafolo reported that he expects it to be blocked again. The Seahawks requested. We haven't heard about it since, but expect this one to get blocked. So Kafka won't really be a choice, but I just thought it'd be interesting to break it down anyways, see why they were talking to him. Now I want to go to the next one. This is names I would like to see. I brought down 5 names here of names that just kind of came off the top of my head. Names I would like to see. Let's go to former head coaches. Let's start with Frank Reich, the former Colts and Panthers coach. He took the year off after being fired from Carolina. There's buzz that he wants to get back in, and there's rumors that he would like to interview for a offensive coordinator job. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl, and under Doug Peterson, who we will talk about in a second. Offensive coordinator for the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl, uses that to get the Colts head coach. He had a couple successful years there with Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers. And then I believe when their offensive coordinator became Carson Wentz, when their quarterback became Carson Wentz, they kind of struggled and he got fired pretty quickly. He got like a pretty quick pull from Irsay. who is just like a loose cannon most of the times. But I do think he's a good coach. He went to Carolina, really struggled. There was some buzz that he didn't want Bryce Young. He actually wanted CJ Stroud, but the owner overrode him and took Bryce Young, and then he was forced to work with someone who he didn't really want to work with. But Frank Reich, well-regarded play caller. It would kind of help to have a former head coach on the offensive side of the ball. I think it would help Mike Macdonald as he kind of, learns the reins a little bit and gets more comfortable in that role. Let's touch on Doug Peterson. This is the name that a lot of people have brought up. Former Super Bowl winning head coach for the Eagles, coach with the Jaguars, made the playoffs there, had a couple decent years, and just got fired. And a Washington State native, which is something that a lot of people bring up. They're saying like, hey, maybe he doesn't want an offensive coordinator job anywhere else, but he's from Washington. Maybe if the Seahawks called, he'd be able to go home, be comfortable there for a year or two, and then maybe just use it as another springboard to get another head coaching job. I think Peterson is probably the one that gets the most buzz out of the former head coaches. I think he has a ton of experience. You have to wonder whether Mike Macdonald is comfortable enough to let a former head coach the offense, because he was very kind of stuck on the point where, like last year, where Grubb got a lot of buzz. And I think there was a point in the season where Mike Macdonald got asked a question like, Ryan Grubb in charge of the offense. How do you feel about that? And he's like, I don't think he would be in charge of the offense. I think Mike Macdonald doesn't want to feel like he's like relinquishing control of one side of the ball. Not saying that he's necessarily a control freak, but I do think that like he wants to cement himself as the head coach and doesn't want to be seen as like a 1-2 punch with Doug Peterson or Frank Reich. That's interesting. However, I still think that experience is so valuable. I think you have to bring him in. And this is kind of an interesting one. David Shaw, former Stanford head coach. This guy has a ton of experience. He picked up after Jim Harbaugh left Stanford. Had a couple good years there. Coached guys like Christian McCaffrey. He had some really successful teams there. Ultimately, I don't know if he resigned or got fired, but he is very well regarded. I believe he is currently now in a advising role for the Broncos. I don't know if he's in the front office or if he's like assisting Sean Payton, but he is an advisor for the Broncos right now, and he is getting head coaching jobs. Would he take an offensive coordinator interview? I don't know, but he did coach kind of on that West Coast up by the Northwest area in Stanford. Um, he is already kind of in the area. He is in Denver, so not a super far difference there. I think David Shaw would be an interesting choice. A ton of experience, a guy who knows what he's doing, a guy who's been around the league, currently working with Sean Payton. Obviously, that has worked out well for them this year. I think David Shaw should definitely at least get a request. Maybe he doesn't want it. Maybe the Broncos don't want him to go, but I think he should definitely at least get a holler from the Seahawks. Let's talk about up and comers now. Let's start with T. Martin. He's the Ravens quarterbacks coach. This guy got buzzed last year for being like the second Mike Macdonald got hired, they were like, T. Martin, this has to be the guy. It has to be T. Martin. Ultimately, I don't know if he said that he didn't want to leave or if he just didn't get the job, but I think there was a point where like it was clear that like it wasn't going to happen before Ryan Grubb got hired. I think T. Martin would be a super intriguing choice. He's a former quarterback, coached with Mike Macdonald before, obviously doing really good work with Lamar Jackson. You can see him at the bottom there, doing really good work with Lamar Jackson. I think as far as experience goes with Macdonald, I think it could really bring some creativity into that building with maybe some quarterback designed runs. The Ravens do love to run the football. They are not necessarily a slinging, pass the ball around team. However, their passing designs are very effective. Sorry, there's a bug above me that just freaked me out. Ultimately, I think T. Martin should get a holler, and I think his experience with Macdonald is valuable and should be taken into consideration. Lastly, let's talk about Adam Stenavich, the Green Bay OC. Now, this is a guy who has been getting a lot of buzz for the Seahawks. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, he's already an OC. You can't get him for an interview. That's not really true. If Adam Stenavich is an OC, Matt LaFleur calls the plays in Green Bay. Him taking an offensive coordinator job to call plays would not be a lateral move. Therefore, they would not block him likely. Stenavich is a guy who is a former offensive lineman, former offensive line coach. Once again, kind of going back to running the football. The Packers ran the ball really effectively this year with Josh Jacobs. They ran all over the Seahawks. I think Stenavich is a really interesting choice. I think he's a younger name, but I think he would get the run game done, and he is from that kind of good experience tree of LaFleur, Shanahan. That whole wave all goes back to Shanahan. Once again, really good experience. I think Stenavich would be a good interview if the Eagles beat the Packers this week in the playoffs. Look out for Stenavich to maybe get on the line with Seattle. We might hear something about that. Ultimately, that is it. That is it. So let me know in the comments who you guys like the most, who you guys want to see interviewed that I maybe didn't talk about. Give me your thoughts on this current situation and what you want to see in an offensive coordinator. I want to thank you guys for watching. Like, comment. I do respond to comments. So if you have any thoughts, comment them down below. I will respond to you. Let me know anything that you liked about the video, anything that you didn't like. I'm fine for a little disagreement. Anyways, please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.